Yes, we're handling the post-quantum cryptography discussion. I'm supposed to kick things off with a 2-minute description of quantum computing and post-quantum cryptography. So people that have dedicated full classes to this subject, or I guess full careers to the subject. I have 2 minutes to sum up all your work. I don't think I'm going to be able to do this, but generally speaking, we have had many years of classical computing with zeros and ones, and since I don't know how far it goes back, but let's say at least the 70s, there was a lot of theoretical ideas about creating quantum computing, where you could have qubits, which would be two states at the same time, two base states at the same time, thus giving a lot more complexity to the ability to be able to compute. As we've run into some physical challenges on classical computing and some other barriers, there's been a lot more investment in quantum computing, and to the point now where we, since around 2000, it depends on what you consider to be the first actual working quantum computer, we've had working quantum computers. The theory is that eventually they'll be able to do a lot of things that classical computing can't do, and one of those is cracking all classical computing cryptography. There's mathematical work behind this, which Christian will get into, and he'll describe all of what I just said in a lot more better detail and correct everything I just got wrong, which is as he should. But the general idea here is that when that day comes, a lot of the protections, cybersecurity protections and other protections we have in place will be at great risk. We've had situations where algorithms have fallen before and we've needed to change, but now we're talking about changing entire structures, and it is a large challenge. And it's going to take a long time to do, and based on the history of changing other algorithms where we haven't been able to convince people until there was very dire situations, especially in governments that I participated in. It's going to be a big challenge for everybody around the world in order to get there. And that's why this becomes a cybersecurity issue that we care. Why quantum computing becomes a cybersecurity issue that we care about. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Christian, who will give kind of the more academic overview and some more background on post-quantum computing.
All right.
We have the slides.
Yes, I think I've prepared. As a scientist in the room, I'm one of the few who has prepared some slides. I think they will be on the screen soon. And in particular, I want to guide you a little bit through this professional's guide to quantum technology, which if you're there scanning the QR codes, you can also just type in the URL on the bottom. You will find online. So I'm a professor in theoretical computer science. I studied mathematics, and I ended up in Amsterdam doing research on quantum cryptography and also post-quantum cryptography. Currently, I'm also the director of QSoft, which is a research center in the Netherlands for quantum software, where we understand software as anything that is not hardware, so in a very broad sense. And so I'm happy to give you kind of the scientist view on like how far we are with quantum computers, what they are and what they do. And you can find all the details, but hopefully at some pretty accessible level in this guide that we wrote, especially like for you guys. So we try to stay away from formulas and kind of give a bit of a inclusive entrance to this sometimes magical world that comprises qubits, as Ari already mentioned, and this thing like superposition and interference. So these are kind of the magic ingredients that you need if you want to build a quantum computer. I'm not going to give a whole lecture on how this works. But indeed, qubits can be like in a superposition of zeros and ones, so they can be anything between 0 and 1s. That's what we call this superposition. And the thing is that every time you add a qubit, a quantum bit, then actually you double your state space. So that's one of the cool things, that one qubit can be in a superposition of 0 and 1, but two qubits can already be in a superposition of 4 possible states. Basically, the bit string 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. So these are 4 states that you can already have with a qubit, and every qubit you add doubles the state space. So this leads to this exponential growth. I guess we all know what exponential growth are now after COVID. The R in the exponent. So that means with like 300 qubits, you can already have 2 to the 300, which is a number that is bigger than the atoms in the universe, possible states of a quantum computer. And this kind of suggests that it's extremely powerful. And indeed it is, but it also comes with a drawback that at the end of your computation, of your quantum computation, you actually have to measure. You have to look at what the state is. And measuring, turns out in quantum mechanics, it destroys the state again. So you have to be quite clever and kind of use this other magic ingredient, which is called interference. And that's also something, you know, for instance, in the interference of sound waves or interference of water waves. You've probably seen these experiments, or this double slit experiment where you see some interference patterns. So this is something that you can also do on a quantum computer. And that's actually crucial to exploit in order to get an advantage from quantum computing. And you basically, like, sometimes you use this analogy that kind of computing or writing a quantum program, writing a quantum software is like composing a nice piece of music, because you try to kind of let the waves interfere in a way that in the end, when you measure, when you look at the outcome of the computation, you get the right thing out. So that's kind of an analogy you can think of. And one important thing that I would like to kind of correct your statement is that quantum computers are not going to be all powerful. Actually, to the contrary, we only know of so far a few, but maybe important applications where we believe that quantum computers will add to our current computing powers. So they work fundamentally very differently. And also, this middle point I make here, quantum computers will not replace our current computers. It's not going to be there's not going to be a world where all the computers we have are quantum. Not at all. We will always need classical computers surrounding this high-tech, complicated technology to actually control it. So the control of a quantum computer will always be classical. So we will not have our quantum laptops on our labs. To the contrary, you can rather think of it as some kind of like a GPU, some extra like device that you add to a classical computer that can solve particular tasks really well. So I think it's more going to be like a special purpose device that you call for, maybe locally, maybe in a cloud. You can already access some quantum computers in the cloud. So that seems to be a thing. And what can you do with it? Well, I list 3 things here. You can also do good things. And actually, the most promising application we think that will have most impact on society, positive impact, is the simulations of quantum mechanical systems. You think, well, that's kind of weird. I mean, it's also kind of logical, because you use a programmable quantum computer, so a device that you can control, to simulate quantum mechanical systems in nature. So we know quantum mechanics is kind of the best description of nature we have. And there are systems that we would really like to understand. For instance, photosynthesis is one, like how do actually plants convert solar light and energy into into something that you can use. Or nitrogen fixation is a typical thing in order to produce fertilizers. So this is currently an extremely energy intensive process, but it turns out that little bacteria, they can actually do this at room temperatures, and they can do it extremely efficiently. We even know kind of where they do it, but we don't understand how. And we know that this process, like where it happens, it's described by quantum mechanics, but our supercomputers currently are just not good enough like not powerful enough to describe this. And our hope is that once we build a programmable quantum computer, we can actually go and kind of understand this process better. So it will not just spit out like the solution to like solve world hunger, but in the contrary, it will will help us understanding like the fundamental process of nature better. And hopefully that will also lead to improvements in general. But of course, that's not why we are here today. Well, it is one of the driving forces of the quantum technology. But it's rather about the second point, because it's also a threat in the sense that powerful quantum computers will break current cryptography, and also not all of cryptography. That's important for those of you who know the difference of public key cryptography and symmetric key cryptography. So it's a big threat for public key cryptography. And that is used all over the place. I mean, you're using it every day, wherever, I guess. You all know what I'm talking about, I hope. So of course we'll come back to that. And the third point I mentioned here is optimization of machine learning tasks. So this is a kind of a bit of a speculation at the moment. And well, a lot more research is needed to actually figure out what added value quantum will bring to this topic. So here it's less clear whether a quantum computer is going to be really useful in this context. All right, then, so on the next slide, this is kind of, I guess, where I as scientists or these people as experts can really tell you, like, when will be the moment when we are in trouble. So this is a poll among, I think, 30 or 50 experts in the field of quantum computing, very recent one from last year, where they simply asked them, like, when will a quantum computer be able to break RSA 2048? That's kind of what we're using nowadays, within 24 hours. And then they say, well, and they give the estimates of probabilities when this will happen, within 5 years or 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. And you can see that, well, the upper line is kind of the optimistic approach, where people are optimistic about quantum computing. That means, like, that's going to be bad for security. So you see, for instance, in 15 years, then the experts estimate that there's around a 50% chance that there will be a quantum computer that can do this very efficiently. So that's kind of the state of affairs. Of course, so there is technological progress in building these things, and every month at least we learn about the latest result about that, and we have to interpret them. But it's still so far away that it's a bit hard to extrapolate. So we cannot really, we cannot be that certain about this timeline. So this sounds a bit like, well, okay, that problem is far away, but I guess we will talk about, like, why this seems to be much, the problem itself is actually much closer to now than these 15 years or these 20 years. Because in principle, the problem is that for encryption, encrypted communication can just be stored now, and actually we know it's been stored, like the NSA is storing everything that is encrypted on the internet, and then once the quantum computer comes around, you can break this encryption. So if you want stuff or your data to be secure for longer periods than, say, these 10, 15 years, you already have to switch to another public key encryption. So do not use RSA, do not use discrete lock-based systems anymore, but you have to switch to an alternative. And these alternatives are currently being figured out. So there's a NSA, so not NSA, but a NIST competition on public key cryptography going. And I think we can switch to the next slide. Well, so that's actually my second point. So currently we are figuring out there's been several years of this process running by NIST, and basically by now we basically know what these algorithms will be to replace the current public key cryptography. And the standards are being written, and they will be available very soon. So within months, I would say at most a year. And as you all know, transitioning, I think Ari also mentioned it, from one algorithm to another in the cryptographic world, because they're so fundamental, they're kind of at the core of all the software out there. It takes a long time, and we're really talking like decades. And so that means we should rather soon start thinking about this. So I guess that's why there is this panel here. And to end, I kind of would like to cite from the letter of members of European Parliament led by Bart Groothuis, who state that the Commission, like the EU Agency for Cybersecurity, and also the European Data Protection Supervisor and Board, they should play an important role in spurring this transition to quantum safe cryptography now by explaining and kind of guiding people and taking what it means, because the law actually already says that appropriate security measures should be taken, but now this has to be made more clear also in face of these developments of quantum computers.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive and helpful, I think. One thing I want to ask you there, since since I worked at NIST, I could come across as being biased on this front. So, but want to get anyone on the panel's viewpoint. But Christian, since you raised it and you're in this space, why should the world like come around to this thing that NIST decides to do?
Right. Yeah. Do you want to? I mean, maybe I can start off like, so I get this question quite often, like, why should we trust NIST? Because also historically, the NSA had some heavy influence on NIST processes. So, but it turns out that this was really kind of a public competition. So as a scientist, I know people who have participated in this. Colleagues of mine have sent in proposals, and basically no one else put up his finger to coordinate this. And basically people trust NIST to do this properly. As far as I know, they have done that as well. Of course, at some point you have to take decisions, but I think all these, the final algorithms, they are kind of, it's clear that they have not been tampered with. And in fact, often who wins these competitions are the Europeans. So both for the SHA-3 and the AES, the standards are actually those that were submitted by actually Belgian cryptographers.
And the two candidate standards for this are
yes,
European.
indeed. Yes, indeed. So those algorithms that will be standardized now are also submitted by a European consortium.
Yeah, it's easy to pick on the one who's taking the lead, right? Obviously, but it doesn't mean it's open for everyone and it's transparent. So it's very happy to see European initiatives putting or adding to this whole problem as well in a positive sense.
So we unfortunately lost our the speaker that's supposed to go next, from Telefonica, Dr. Pastor Perales, it sprained his ankle and couldn't travel. So, which is unfortunate, but he was going to talk about key distribution. I don't know if, can we pass this to the whole panel to discuss key distribution? Because I do think it kind of fits in before we go into either we're going to talk about operational technology and some of the challenges there and in governments. But if you want to talk about key distribution as kind of like a midterm solution here?
Well, I'm not the expert at key distribution in this way, but since it's affecting our public key encryption algorithms, the distribution of the key and these things is a huge challenge. So I believe you have more expert on this and both with photons and things like that.
Right. Yeah. So of course, what public key cryptography is used, the purpose of basically all of public key cryptography is, well, on the one side to actually do digital signatures, for instance, signing operation system updates. So whenever you update your phone or computer, that's digitally signed. So this is one of the main use cases of public key cryptography. And the other one is, as you said, to distribute keys. Basically, when you go with your browser or phone to visit a website that you've never visited before, your client and the web server agrees on a new key, on a session key using public key cryptography. And that happens whenever you initiate a new conversation, same with your messaging apps, etc. So that's basically where public key cryptography is used. And so there've been so we're now talking about post-quantum cryptography, which means like classical or conventional cryptography that remains secure against quantum attackers. But as a researcher in quantum cryptography in general, of course, there's also another side to that. Namely, you can use quantum effects in quantum communication. So if you use photons to transmit over fibers, and then we're talking about single photons and not like at the standard photon transmissions that telecom are using now. But there is a way to do this in a way that is kind of unhackable, as the physicists say, where it makes it much harder to eavesdrop on. And the thing is that, as I mentioned before, when you try to observe quantum information, if you look at the quantum information, you measure it, then you disturb it. And you can use this physical principle as the basis of securing your communication. Basically, you encode a message into photons, and you submit those over an optical fiber, and then you can check whether somebody has listened to it. You can check whether somebody has tried to interfere or to eavesdrop on, because you can see that a measurement has actually changed the transmission. So if you're kind of at the honest ends of these two lines, you can kind of figure out whether there was somebody in between. If there was, you restart, and otherwise you can distill a key from it. And this is called quantum key distribution.
This is the advantage of having actual physicists in charge of computing. For once, like we actually can do real measurement and get real answers about whether security's been breached. It would be a good thing.
Yes.
So
So
that would be
the
positive.
advantage of this would be that you basically, once this is in place, you don't have to update your system anymore. Because so far, public key cryptography, there's always, it's what we call computationally secure. It's based on a mathematically hard problem of a particular size, for instance, RSA 2048. But at some point, our computers, say 100 or 200 years from now, they might be so much better, for instance, quantum computers, they can break these problems. So you will have to update your cryptography to kind of cope with this increased computing power. Whereas if you have QKD, you can kind of mathematically prove that the keys that you get from the system are secure. So this provides a system that you don't have to upgrade anymore. But it has also drawbacks. Basically, you already have to start with a key, and you cannot do, it's not as powerful in terms of applications that you have compared to post-quantum cryptography. So my personal take on QKDs, it's very nice as a research subject. Actually, I do personally research on this topic because I think it's an interesting new technology, but it's still a little bit further away from practice. So I would say post-quantum cryptography is something that nobody can evade. All of you will have to deal with this problem at some point, but QKD is kind of nice to have, and for some particular applications, it might be a nice added value.
So would you argue that the key distribution is even further away from cracking RSA 2048?
Yeah, so quantum key distribution is not the attack on
No,
RSA, but it's kind of a way to prevent it.
For that.
No, so QKD is something that you can do already now.
Okay.
It's just rather expensive, and you need to change your hardware for it. But for post-quantum crypto, you basically have to upgrade your software. Maybe you have to have a little bit more powerful software and hardware, but it's not that you have to totally change your communication infrastructure.
Gotcha.
Well, speaking of changing hardware and software, this is a good cue in for Philomena. What are the challenges that you see in, you work for Schneider Electric, you work with other companies in critical infrastructure around the world. What's the challenges that you see for them in implementing post-quantum cryptography or other solutions to this problem?
Yeah. I think the main thing really,
sorry,
I think the main thing for businesses really is to understand that this will be a long business transformation. And although, we're saying potentially it's 20 years off, we do know that we need to think about it beforehand so that we're ready when it happens, but also it needs to be a risk-based approach. So it really goes back to the normal core security fundamentals of knowing what you've got. So the first step really is to understand what you're using yourself as an organization, what you use in your products. Have you got any cryptography? Where is it? What's it used for? But then also your data streams. So understanding why you keep your data, why your customers need to keep their data, and therefore working on both of those things, you can understand the risk element of how important it is to take action well before time, because of course these are only estimations at the moment, and we know from other methods of science that we could be pessimistic or we could be optimistic. So it's really looking at that risk-based approach. And then we also need to think about our supply chains, because one of the key things in critical infrastructure is that we've got this extended attack surface because of our supply chains. So we need to be looking at raising awareness with them and getting them ready to look at this very long transformation. And part of that is getting all the information together in order to raise the investment, because this is not going to be cheap. We're looking at a really large scale environment, perhaps, similar to the, say, hype that was concerned around the year 2000, where we really had to gear up and try and understand where that extra digit was going to make all the difference. And I think, as we can see, it's a very specialist area. So the important thing as well is to look at getting the right level of support when you do start your transformation, or indeed to do the risk assessment. And then I think, two other things really is standardization, whether it's NIST, whether it's another trusted organization, is absolutely going to be our friend. It's a very complex area, and we don't want to be, dabbling too much. We really do want to get standardization across this piece. And then I think finally, it really is about understanding what the business benefit is, because for those of us who understand it more, yes, it is a threat, absolutely. But in understanding the threat, you can also realize the opportunity. So you can work with your countries, your companies, to actually really look at how this can be optimized to be an opportunity that brings new economic benefits to the world. And I know it's going to be, I think, particularly useful in the medical sphere for looking at new drug breakthroughs. So I think that's the sort of quick roundup of the implications for businesses.
But on that question of is there any sense yet as to, are we going to need to do a lot of convincing on swapping out hardware to really solve this problem in a lot of places, or are we going to be able to come up with solutions that work for technology that may be in place from 30 years ago or beyond for this problem?
I think it's probably not totally clear yet, although I'm definitely not an encryption expert. But I think the likelihood is it will be swapping out hardware, although I'm sure, like any other evolution, humans are innately able to increase their innovation when they really need to. So I think we can often rely on new things coming to deal with this problem as we obviously get nearer to the time.
Yes.
So it's waiting for the next cataclysmic event to push innovation along.
Yeah.
So, John, speaking of older technology, you're thinking about this space in terms of getting governments to swap out and to actually think about this issue ahead of time and plan, right? I mean, a lot of this is about planning, but where do you think things are right now with governments at all levels?
For us as a security vendor, as one of the many vendors here in the room as well, we often have conversations with governments and address or try to make them aware, just like the scientist world and the scientific world is doing as well, about the risk of what they're facing. For the longest time when we were talking to governments, some organizations saw purely from an offensive point of view. It's like, oh, we can do X, Y, or Z. Oh, let's wiretap the whole internet and we can actually store everything that's encrypted and then decrypt it later. And now you do see, you can attest probably to that with NIST, with the development of the new algorithms, that there is a sense of urgency, that there's a sense of hey, we need to develop some algorithms that will bring us to the next phase. One of the things that is now very evident for us, it's actually the implementation. And that's a really big struggle that can be very costly. And that's something that governments should not face alone. That's, I think, a joint problem with academia and the private sector as well. As we look at large organizations or large private sector organizations that are pushing the boundaries and are making new innovation. So we should embrace that as well. So we're speaking to the governments quite often about this as well. And we do need to involve the private sector more closely on this, because organizations like a Microsoft or a Google or even Cisco, larger organizations do play a vital role in building the hardware and pushing new technology out to the world.
Thanks. One area that I was curious about in having some discussions, and it's something that Michael Daniel raised earlier this week too. as we get into this kind of store and decrypt discussions, how possible do we really think it is to take encrypted data and put it in an organized format so that you can actually go back to it once you're ready to decrypt it and figure out what you actually have?
It's like a tape recorder from an old test tape, and everybody is on like MP3s, and you can't really play it.
Like with different tapes all over the place, and you don't really know which one. They're not labeled, right? Because it was encrypted originally. You can, label where you came from, but not what's actually on it. Is it possible to actually go back and organize encrypted information in that way? How much of a threat is this really? Especially
you want the theoretical or the practical?
Well, because it is both. The question is both of those things, because it is also, if you, as you say, there's some advantage to doing it far in advance, right? Because the older the data is, the harder clearly it would be to do that, just from a practical sense. But I'm also interested from the theoretical sense too. But both, yeah.
Well, I'll leave the theoretical sense to my co-panelists. From a practical sense, like for intelligence, if we go down to the core, what is it that you want to decrypt? What is it you hope you get out of it? And is what you're going to get out of it still valuable to you to put that investment in? It's very class. I'm a military schooled individual. I've done my training behind like where you get captured behind enemy lines and you have information of your operation. How long is that information valuable to the adversary? And they will torture you, or they'll try to break your encryption. That's my torturing and waterboarding. And you will give up all the secrets. But after an X amount of time, that information is no longer useful. So there's no incentive for them to torture you or waterboard you, and they will just have other means. But that analogy still sticks with the information that's being stored as well. So is it still valuable to the adversary that they can actually use their means to try to decrypt it as well? And then it really depends on, how long ago have they stored it? So let's say China interested if there's actually UFOs in Roswell, and has that been encrypted? I don't know. Secret communications. In my own experience, when I look at decrypting or trying to crack encryption, and not really crack encryption, the largest successes that we have seen in the practical sense have been side channel attacks or attacking weak implementations of encryption. And that goes for when you look at governments that are trying to attack folks, but that even goes in an ongoing fight against ransomware, where we see criminals trying to leverage a lot of encryption. That's the whole core in encrypting files. And they do that in the wrong sense. They implemented it wrong. And we were actually able to crack this and build a decryptor and give the files back for free. So encryption is hard. Implementation is even harder.
Yeah, I would say I agree with John, but also I guess I suspect that there are the targets are quite well known, like where they know where to look. So I agree with maybe with mass communication that you store now, then it might be difficult. But even that, agencies are pretty good at filtering out mass information to like survey. But in targeted communication, like diplomatic channels, etc., or just particular people, I think that might still be valuable in years to come.
And mind you don't need quantum to go through that data set to select which data you want to crack.
Once it's decrypted,
right.
then you
That's a big data problem. You can use conventional machine learning and AI to filter through that.
I guess one thing, Philomena, that you had raised and we talked about before, that's in the prep call, was on risk assessments and kind of the idea of doing risk assessments. Do you think it's a good idea to kind of work on standardizing risk assessments, come up with a framework for how we go about figuring out how to solve some of the problems that are going to come around in the conversion?
No, definitely. And I think this is particularly where governments can help, and standards bodies, to start to articulate a repeatable way of doing the risk assessment, because that will reduce the cost and also make it easier for smaller companies, medium-sized enterprises to access. So definitely, I think that's something that we need to be having a call to action on now, really, to
Others?
start to get things
Other
moving.
thoughts on that, John? Yes.
Yeah, I actually think if you haven't scanned the QR code, please do, because their guide is really, really explanatory. But even starting with having a committee, start thinking about the problem. Even though you don't think it's a problem yet, start thinking about it, appoint people, gather information, read up on it, and slowly but surely. I also realize when you look at this, I think the majority of the organizations that are going to be faced with the problems are not going to be the ones coming up with the solution. So do you realize how much your circle of influence is? How much can you push this along? But having an understanding of what your exposure is, what your risk is, that's the first step. And then you can have a conversation with your vendors, with your suppliers about, okay, what are you doing about this? And then it cascades through, and you'll eventually have a greater group that can have a better influence.
Okay, questions from the audience? I have one big question left, but
Not on waterboarding, I hope.
yeah.
I know it's a very interesting panel, thanks. When I look at quantum, I guess my question is, what do you want from government? I know you touched on some of the kind of positive sides here, right? You know, the competition, getting people together in a committee. What was the other one you were saying? The risk assessment. But is there, you know, we're in the EU, right? Is there a stick going on with the ballot? I mean, is there anything that you think?
This was my big question, which is when, I'm going to ask it my way too, which is, at what date do you have to regulate to get people to actually do it?
Yeah, probably better sooner than later. And obviously, this letter by Bart and other EU members, Parliament members, they're trying to push it, because I think the regulations are there, but just they need to be clarified in this respect. So basically, if you are forced, I mean, the regulation says you have to keep your data safe for, say, and for some particular data, like say medical data or state secrets, you have to keep it safe for 20 years. Well, then you're already late now. So you basically have to have things to act on now.
And I think the other thing as well is that some data, although you know, lots of data becomes less useful with time, there are certain types of data, for example, health data, that remain a constant. And whilst they might not be, you know, a big issue, it just demonstrates the importance of that risk assessment of data to really understand how long is it useful for, and what might be the situation if it was available to an adversary.
I think interestingly, like the US has put out a presidential order, basically, that all public administration has to be quantum secure by, I don't know, very soon. So that actually gave a big push to this whole part of the industry to actually implement this.
Actually that they've already laid out
Right.
that you can see.
But I think they're just ahead, no? Basically, that gives the right incentives to start thinking about this more concretely.
We also wrote I worked on an executive order
Thank you.
when I was in government, and this was 10 years ago. And it came with billions of dollars of support. So that's the other thing that the EU and governments and country governments here have to think about, is how much they're willing to invest to get the governments in the right place, and also get small and medium businesses in the right place. I'm not worried about banks or hospital. Well, some hospitals. The big hospitals, you know, the little guys, the rural hospitals are the ones you have to worry about, and other the critical infrastructure. So, Tim, yeah.
Yeah, so given that the data that we processing and storing right now can be at least already, but where there's now currently not a one-proof algorithm or set algorithms available yet, in the meantime, are there any other measures to mitigate those risks?
So these algorithms are available now. So I think in your Chrome browser, yesterday I was told you go to chrome.//flags and you just turn on post-quantum encryption TLS 1.3. So it is there, especially for like powerful enough devices. Actually, the drawback of this post-quantum cryptography is that it requires more resources than the current systems. That's basically why also it's a part of the problem is that often the signature sizes or the key sizes are larger and they require a bit more computing power, which on big devices is maybe not a problem, but say on constrained devices like phones or even Internet of Things hardware, this can be an issue. And that's just adding to the problem of transitioning to these.
Bernard.
Yeah, just to mention, you know, the false quantum cryptography. So that the answer would be using private but with a new algorithm. So starting now to slightly re-encrypt the data, because I think on the signature part, we really want that, which would be potentially quicker to address because it's just a signature. But on the cryptography part, or the encryption part, you mentioned that those algorithms exist already. So do you recommend to slightly talk to the encrypted data with the primary algorithm?
Yeah, so again, it depends on your risk assessment, like whether that is worth it. But if you deem to, if you have really a secret that you want to keep secure for long, then ideally you use hybrid encryption, what you call. So using both the current systems and the new post cryptography systems, so that you actually an attacker has to break both in order to retrieve the key. So that is what I would recommend. But of course, it comes at a price. It will cost you more computing power. It will cost you some more memory. But if you deem it worth it, then you should do that.
Yeah, yeah, you.
It's a very interesting discussion. I'm just thinking, what is this statement that the alongside policy that is going to be right? Because it looks like the discussion of tomorrow or 5 years is a real discussion of today or even yesterday, like we should have done something already yesterday. Because also as the next transition of the really implementation of the cyber policy, can we already do something within the framework to start our preparation or moving to the new types of technology or different roadmaps or what can we do already within the
Yeah, you want, so this is in MEP Bart Groothouse's letter that was in one of the slides there, where he actually has a full list of what can be done with existing policy. But do you have the letter there, or do you want to read?
I have the whole letter,
Yeah.
but I don't think I can display it.
Okay, yeah,
But
that's fine.
well, of course, also you have a whole chapter.
And we have that's what this part of the report is. We do point out very specifically what can be done with existing standards. I mean, the thing that would be harder to do is the question that Chris asked, which is, what's the regulation? What's the new regulation? Which is, if we decide that some sectors are more vulnerable than others, how do we prioritize those and get them to do it immediately, or kind of have the emergency side of it as opposed to the, we have to add this to the list of things that people have to do anyways. Right.
As far as I know, there's no concrete plans of action in there yet. So
Right.
And that's basically this letter is asking for this clarification, but this has still to come, maybe from ENISA or from this European Data Protection Board and Supervisor. I hope this will happen.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to end. I think we're right at time right now, actually. Thank you all for your participation. I think it was really great panel. And I'm going to pass things off to Michael.